It's week 3 of college football, and in this game we have the tale of two teams, one with a promising future as Mel Tucker leads the Michigan State Spartans into Miami with a record of 2-0 after the Spartans' dominant victory over last season's Big Ten West champions, the Northwestern Wildcats. And the Spartans did what they had to do by blowing out the overmatched Youngstown Penguins 42-14. And for the Miami Hurricanes, led by Manny Diaz, they find themselves in an uncomfortable and all too familiar position as they come into the game with a 1-1 record after being routed by the Alabama Crimson Tide in the annual Alabama Obliteration Bowl, a game in which many teams have suffered. But for the Canes, the loss cuts much deeper because once again, they were able to gauge themselves and the distance between them and the teams they hope to compete against, a theme that has become all too common in the Manny Diaz era. But the Canes are coming off a victory over the Appalachian State Mountaineers, and even though it was a close call, a win is a win. But in this matchup, once again, the Miami Hurricanes have an opportunity to gauge themselves against the other college football teams in the nation. And this is a game that could potentially be viewed as a revenge game of sorts. Or perhaps it will be a game in which Mel Tucker simply finishes off the remains that Nick Saban left behind. Because Mel Tucker is a Nick Saban disciple with a similar mindset, as both were defensive backs in college, and Nick Saban is the man who gave Mel Tucker his first coaching opportunity at Michigan State. Mel Tucker then made a stop at Miami of Ohio before reuniting with Nick Saban in LSU to coach defensive backs. Mel Tucker then went on to coach defensive backs at Ohio State, where they were up against the defending national champions and overwhelming favorites, the Miami Hurricanes, in the Fiesta Bowl. And the Ohio State Buckeyes were able to pull off the upset victory over the Canes, in large part due to Mel Tucker's coaching, a loss that some would argue the Hurricanes have never recovered from. So for Mel Tucker, just like Nick Saban, some of their most noteworthy moments have come at the expense of Miami. And just like Nick Saban, Mel Tucker has that same ruthless personality, because as Saban did with the Dolphins after vowing not to leave, Mel Tucker, after one season with the Colorado Buffaloes, abandoned the school to take the head coaching job at his dream school at Michigan State. And he brought that ruthless mentality over to the Spartans as well, where after evaluating the roster and noticing the lack of talent, he pushed for a massive overhaul. As he stated, nothing is set in stone. It's compete and show us what you can do and earn your spot. Earn your playing time, earn your right to be able to even stay on the team. And he stayed true to those words, as many players will go on to enter the transfer portal as others took their place. In fact, it could be argued that no program has taken advantage of the transfer portal to the degree that the Spartans have. For Miami, while Manny Diaz was once viewed as the savior of the program, a man that took over the job that Mark Richt abandoned, and a man who brought swagger back to the U after invading the turnover chain, a tradition that many programs will go on to mimic, and a man who revolutionized the defense in the process, this game feels much more like a do-or-die situation for Manny Diaz and the Hurricanes, given Mel Tucker's recent success and the Canes' recent struggles, especially when considering the talent gap between these two teams. The Miami Hurricanes are ranked 13th nationally talent-wise, while Michigan State, even with the transfers, only ranks 36th, according to 24/7 Sports. But before we talk about the talent, we first must discuss how these players will be used. First, for Miami, their offense is led by offensive coordinator Rhett Lashlee. Rhett Lashlee is a Gus Malzahn protege who played quarterback under Malzahn in high school. Lashlee had worked under Malzahn for most of his coaching career, outside of a few stops where he was able to develop his craft. In his own words, he says, "People ask me all the time, what kind of offense do I run? You've got air raid, you've got no huddle, you've got this and that. I couldn't tell you. It's probably more of a power spread offense." And the most clear principle in Rhett Lashlee's offense is that he wants to play fast by using tempo and running simple concepts. As he says, "I want us to be aggressive, I want us to be attacking, and be simple for our guys where we can play fast, not only physically, but mentally." As for the Spartans, Scott Hazelton is Michigan State's defensive coordinator, but make no mistake about it, this is just as much a Mel Tucker defense. And as stated before, Mel Tucker is a Nick Saban disciple whose defensive principles, at its core, are in lockstep with Nick Saban's. While Michigan State uses a 4-2-5 base look, as opposed to a 3-4 hybrid like Nick Saban, Michigan State's defense still tries its best to live by those principles. As explained, the 3-4 hybrid is a 3-4 base defense that provides flexibility both from the defensive shape and personnel perspective. It's a defense that can mold itself based on opponent schemes and personnel. While it's technically a 3-4 base defense, it's deployed as a 4-man front majority of times. And because Tucker, like Saban, is defensive back at heart, he knows their value, as he states, "I'm used to being a nickel and dime actually, having 6 defensive backs on the field quite a lot, because that gives you the ability to match up and play multiple coverages and be able to match personnel and play man coverage when you need to." So Tucker's defense is in fact a defense with multiple forms that can bend and mold to any shape as needed, which allows him to seamlessly switch from man to zone coverage with few tells. And because Tucker is still new to Michigan State, we have yet to see this defense's final form. Then when talking about how these two groups will be deployed on the field, for Miami on offense, it starts with D'Eriq King. D'Eriq King is an undersized quarterback who is a dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands. Many times when the offense is unproductive, you can count on King to make something out of nothing. However, D'Eriq King has been pretty inconsistent this season, and outside of a few rare occasions, the deep ball hasn't been much of a threat for the Canes offense. D'Eriq King has also commonly looked to escape the pocket at the first sign of trouble, as opposed to hanging in there to find the open man downfield. At tailback, before the season, the Miami Hurricanes entered the year with a solid trio of running backs, but injuries and off-field issues have left the Canes with Cam Harris as their lone proven tailback. Harris has shown good playmaking ability, and he's probably Miami's best overall back. And while he's not the sort of player who's going to wow you with his playmaking ability, he is a very capable back who is talented enough to contribute on any team nationally and start for most. At receiver, this is a group loaded with talented players that will at times wow you with their ability, but last season and early this season, they have had a major issue with dropping the ball. Mike Harley is the leader of this group, a fantastic slot receiver who the quarterback can rely on consistently to get open when all else fails. And he's usually as sure-handed as they come, but recently even he's uncharacteristically dropped the ball on critical downs. But the talk of the town right now is number 5, Keyshawn Smith. Keyshawn Smith is a playmaker in every sense of the word. He's excellent downfield and can make catches that most receivers can only dream of. Keyshawn Smith is a clear difference maker on the team and a rising star nationally. For tight end, Miami has Will Mallory, a player with loads of talent and a highly regarded prospect coming into the season. But just like Miami's receiver room, there's been a clear lack of consistency in his play. Then when we go to Miami's offensive line, a veteran group with a lot of hype coming into the season, given their experience and perceived talent. But after 2 poor performances back-to-back, first versus Alabama, which who could blame them, but more importantly, against App State, this crew now has a lot to live up to. As for Michigan State, starting up front with their defensive line, this is a group I wouldn't necessarily consider a strength nationally, but it might be the deepest unit on their defensive side of the ball. Drew Beasley has emerged as a solid pass rusher on this team, and Jacob Panashuk has also shown a clear pass rushing prowess, but neither of these players should be considered a top pass rusher. And with Jalen Hunt possibly missing from the defensive line, along with Jacob Slade, Drew Jordan, and Tank Brown, this group could be missing key players that would contribute to this front. Then to Michigan State's linebacker room, where they have completely flipped it on its head from last season. Chase Klein is a solid overall linebacker who does everything well for this team, and Quavaris Crouch, the Tennessee transfer, is a player who's still learning the system, but he does specialize in blitzing, although he does lack coverage ability. But the standout of this group is Michael Dow, a converted safety who plays more of the nickel or star position on this team. He is the key to this defense, as he's asked to do everything from playing the box to blitzing to dropping back in coverage. And he is a utility player who makes everything on this defense work. But this Michigan State front still has a lot to prove, as they've shown a lack of sideline to sideline speed and consistency stopping power runs. Then at defensive back, starting with the corners, Kalen Gervin and the Alabama transfer, Ronald Williams, have seen a lot of reps, but Williams in particular really struggled covering Kansas transfer Stephon Robinson in the Northwestern game. And overall, this defensive backfield is still a work in progress, although they are an improving group. Luckily for the Spartans, they have Xavier Henderson at safety, and he is a player who cleans a lot of things up. He is without a doubt one of the better safeties in the nation, and he really helps this defense look good. Then on the flip side, for Michigan State's offense, it is led by Jay Johnson, and just watching the games, the offense is very difficult to grasp. But upon further investigation, I learned that that is by design. I like to call Jay Johnson the offensive enigma because he doesn't have one style. As he says, we want to be very multiple to keep opposing defenses guessing, and he has no commitment to the running game or the passing game, so it's hard to tell when or if he'll do either. As he states, in some games, we might lean a little bit more on the throw, and in other games, we might lean a little bit more on the run. When first watching the Michigan State game against Northwestern, they seemed to be in a flex bone set, but then they would switch to a 4-wide set, and then a different look after that. But if you focus hard enough, you will see a couple simple rules that this offense follows, with the first thing being, they use their tight end in very creative ways. As he states, the quarterback is the CEO, but the tight end is the MVP. It's a flexible player that he has do a lot for the offense, from carrying the ball, to blocking, to receiving, to being a lead blocker for the tailback. And he moves them all over the place to create mismatches. And on offense, Mel Tucker and Jay Johnson live by one simple rule: no block, no rock. And they are hard on their offensive linemen to prove that they are capable of moving the line of scrimmage if they want to pound the ball. Then for Miami, their head coach Manny Diaz is in charge of the defense, and he runs a simple concept called fire zone, which is basically a heavy blitzing defense that in theory will force the offense to make hasty decisions, leading them to forced errors and negative plays. And now let's take a look at the players who will be used in these concepts. First, for the Spartans, their signal caller Peyton Thorne is a first-year starter who's looked pretty sharp so far. Being the son of a football coach, he's one of those players who were groomed to play the position from an early age, and Thorne is a capable runner as well. For Michigan State's backfield, they have Kenneth Walker III, a player who coming into the season wasn't unknown, but after a record-breaking performance against Northwestern, he is a tailback who everyone has an eye on. For Michigan State's receiver room, this is also a group that's full of unknown nationally, but they are starting to make a name for themselves as well. Jaden Reed is their #1 receiver and a proven go-to guy for the Spartans. Jalen Naylor is next up. He's a player with a lot of talent, but he does have consistency issues. Then Trey Mosley is next up, and he is another very capable player on this offense. Then we have Connor Hay, a converted running back turned tight end. He is at the core of what makes this offense work. He's a versatile player who is very tough and very smart. He just does everything well. He won't wow you with his athleticism or physical ability, but he is always in the right spot, and he always does what is necessary for the team. And then we have their offensive line, and this is a group with some good and some bad. They are a much better pass blocking group than run blocking group, unless Walker is in the backfield, but they are a unit who hasn't shown any glaring weaknesses thus far. But they also have never seen a defensive front quite like the Miami Hurricanes. Miami is led by Nasty Nesta Severa, a solid defensive tackle who is extremely talented but very inconsistent. But Jafari Harvey and Zach McLeod are probably the two standouts on the defensive front. Both of these players came into the season with potential, but the more they play, the clearer their talent as edge rusher shines, as they were able to create pressure even against Alabama's offensive line. However, while getting to the quarterback isn't necessarily a weakness for Miami, stopping the run is, as Cameron Peoples, Appalachian State's running back, proved by gashing the Canes in their matchup. And Miami's linebacker play, especially now that Keontre Smith is missing in action, was and remains a weakness for this team, although Corey Flagg has flashed some ability, with one of the front seven's main issues being that they are overly aggressive at getting upfield, which leaves huge gaps in their defense, which allows tight ends to easily sneak behind them and make plays for huge gains. The group also continues to have a problem keeping contained, as everyone looks to get upfield, but no one looks to set the perimeter. As for the defensive backs, they have two very solid corners in Tariq Stevenson, who is probably their best overall defensive back, and Corey Couch, who is probably their best overall cover corner. As for their safeties, Gervin Hall Jr. has made strides in his production this season and continues to improve, while Bubba Bowden is certainly their most talented safety who plays with his emotions on his sleeve, but we have yet to see the best version of him on the field. And at the end of the day, as stated before, this game seems like a do-or-die moment for Manny Diaz, as the Miami Hurricanes and Michigan State Spartans load up to meet. Will it end with the Nick Saban disciple picking off the remains of the Canes, or will Miami send Mel Tucker and his Spartans home on their shields?